Hello, we are here with a listener who loves podcasts, found us by looking up popular adoptee podcasts, which makes us happy. And and this is Patrick Hawes joining us from Pennsylvania, Southern Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And welcome.
Oh,
Welcome.
thank you all so
Hi,
much for having
Patrick.
me.
Thanks for
Hi.
being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited. So, dig in from how you want to tell your story.
Oh boy. So I was born in North Carolina. Actually, back then it was a small town. It's not so small anymore. Asheville, North
Mhm.
Oh,
Carolina, in the western part of North Carolina. I consider it one of the most beautiful places on
Yes.
earth.
many
Um,
it's a
Mhm.
popular destination for people
it
to move when they leave like
yes.
LA. A lot of people
Yeah.
seem to go there.
Yeah, that's surprisingly, it is now. I mean, when I was growing up, it was just this little small town in between Nashville and Charlotte.
Yeah.
And, so now it's just huge. But so I was born in August of 1970 and adopted about 6 weeks, officially adopted 6 weeks later. And the interesting part for me was that my adopted mom was Japanese and my
Mm.
adopted dad was American, and they were both older. Matter of fact, my adopted dad was 47, and my
Wow.
Yeah, it
my
is older.
adopted yeah my adopted mom was 42, and so
Unusual.
yeah, it was different. My adopted dad, he was very interesting guy. He served in World War II actually. He was born
Wow.
in 1923. And so he was served in World War II in the Air Force and actually had a very interesting job. He was a hurricane hunter. He was a weather forecaster, but he mainly was a hurricane hunter. So he used to
Wow.
fly into the hurricanes as a weatherman during the war and even after. So he did 20 years, but he met my adopted mom in Japan. And 1964, they got married and they moved back to Asheville, which is where he was from. Grew up in Asheville, so moved back there, and then they adopted me right after I was born in 1970. And then, sadly, my adopted dad he passed away about 3.5 weeks after I turned 4.
Oh,
Oh,
He got cancer. Actually, got liver cancer,
wow.
and back then there was really not much they
No.
could do, with cancer except treat it with morphine. So he passed away. My birthday is August 10th, and then he passed away. Actually, tomorrow will be
Oh,
almost going on 50 years that he's been
gosh.
gone. So it's been so that I've always told people that that was like the beginning of my issues with, like in connection with being adopted, is that connection, that losing
did
my
you
adopted
know?
dad.
Did they tell you you were adopted?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
I was gonna mention that is that my my adopted mom, like I said, she was Japanese, so there was really no hiding the fact
Yeah.
that I wasn't hers. But I have said to people that knew my adopted mom, Yuki, that had I looked even remotely Japanese, she would have passed me off as hers.
Yeah.
There's no question in my mind that because she just was a different she was a very interesting person, but she was also very complicated. And my relationship with her, um, it had it was very complicated. That's the way I tell people this. It's very complicated because there was always a barrier between her and I because I didn't speak Japanese. She
Mhm.
tried speaking Japanese to me when I was very, very young. But as I got older, well, my adopted dad was the one that told her to stop because I was going to go into an American school and learn English. And he felt very strongly that, I was going to get confused. So she stopped talking in Japanese to me and then
That's sort of
never,
sad.
yeah, I look back on it and it's a
Yeah.
big regret of mine. But what it did lead to was it led to it led to this distance between her
Mhm.
and I because she could communicate to her friends and other kids that were Japanese. She could communicate to them in a different in a way that I couldn't communicate with her. And so we definitely was, yeah, like I said, it was a complicated relationship
And she was your
between her and
sole
I.
parent after 4 years old.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And
Now,
no other siblings?
nope, no other siblings. And well, I was going to save this for later, but I guess I'll say it now. I found what really my relationship with her when she passed away in 2004, and um, that was really devastating to me. Much like losing my adopted dad was really devastating to me, as growing up without a, you know,
Mm-hmm.
growing up in those formative years without a father. Even though I had a stepfather, it was different, and I really was missing, especially in my young teenage years. I was really missing him and having him, and I wanted him really bad. And sorry, I often get very emotional talking about him
That's
because
okay.
Mm.
he was somebody that I wanted so desperately to get to know, and I missed out on that. And yeah, talking about him gets me emotional, so I'm
And
sorry.
it sounds like he was the one you bonded with probably after,
Yeah,
Or yeah.
yeah, and I mean, my adopted dad, like I said, the one that passed away when I was 4, it was that void, it's that hole
Mm-hmm.
that was left behind, and it really led to a lot of like feeling of who's the next person that's going to walk out on my life. My birth mom gave me up for adoption. Now my adopted dad has passed away. Who's next? And then it really was reinforced. I was 34 when Yuki passed away, and that was just another blow to like, okay, all these people are just, they're leaving.
Plus you weren't able to really, sounds like you had a difficult relationship with
Yeah.
Yuki
Yeah, and
anyway.
again,
So there is
yes,
that, that does sound very lonely.
yes,
That's
it
what I was
was. That's
thinking.
a
Lonely.
Yep, that's probably the best word to describe it. It was tough. And I thank God for my wife, because she was my rock. She is my rock. That yeah, it keeps me grounded a lot, and she helped me a lot through that whole process and through finding my birth family, which, growing up, I had asked Yuki
Yeah, I
often.
was going to say,
Yeah,
what did she
Yeah.
tell you?
yeah, so my first time I heard the word adopted, I was 5, 6, somewhere in there. And of course I didn't know what it meant, but she just said, she told me, from what I can remember, she told me, your birth mom was very young when she had you and couldn't afford to keep you. And then as I got older, she started telling me she would always add this line of, and she didn't really want you,
Oh gosh.
which was very, very hurtful to me as I got
Yes.
older.
To
And
your psyche.
yes, yeah.
Oh
And as
God.
I got, at that time, I was like, well, is she saying that to keep me from searching, or is she saying that for another reason? I didn't know. But what I found out about Yuki, sadly, and this is why I talk about the distance and the barrier between her and I, was that my stepdad, who I still have a relationship with, and by the way, I call him my dad. He for all intents purposes, he is my dad, and he's done amazing things for me, and I really, really value him and having him in my life. And he told me after she passed away that he said, "Did Yuki ever tell you about a child that she had?" And I said,
Mm.
"No." And so he led me to a couple of of Yuki's Japanese friends, and he said if anyone knows the whole detail, because he didn't know, he just knew that she had had a child before.
Before
Um,
you? Before you?
yes, very,
Mhm.
very much so before me. And so I went to one of her Japanese friends and I said, what do you know about this? Do you know anything about it? And she said, yes. It turns out that Yuki had a son. And she said, I don't know anything about it. I don't know the details. Yuki just told me a few minor things. But she mentioned this other one of Yuki's Japanese friends that she confided in completely. And so one day got up the nerve to call, and mind you, this was about 2 years after Yuki had passed away.
Mm-hmm.
So I got up the strength to call this Japanese friend of hers, and I, talked to her about it, and I said, "What do you know?" And the first words out of her mouth was, "Yuki didn't tell you any of this?" I said, "No, she didn't tell me any of it." And so what she told me was that Yuki was, this was back in Japan in the mid 50s, and she got pregnant from a guy in the Japanese army, I believe it was. And her parents, she was young, and her parents found out about it. Now, when I say this next part, I hope you and your listeners understand the context of Yuki's parents, because Yuki was born in 1927. So
Mm-hmm.
her parents were 1800s Japan, which was still the shogun era. There was a lot of and honor is a very, very big thing in Japan. And so what happened
And
was
disgracing your honor is a big
absolutely.
thing.
And
Mhm.
so when her parents found out about it, they made her carry the child to term. Then they gave the child to Yuki's brother to raise. And then while they were in the hospital, they told the doctors to give Yuki a hysterectomy so that she could never
Oh,
have kids again.
that's why
And
she didn't have children.
yes, that
Oh
is
my
why
God.
she never
So
had children again.
she's carrying around a whole lot of stuff when she adopted
Yes.
you.
Yes. And so now that was so when I heard that, um, I had still not found my birth parents or my birth mom or anything like that. So I felt even more like really just pain for Yuki, and I tried to understand. But then what I found out later on also was that she was in touch with this son before she died. She was in touch with him. She was communicating with him. And so that really, in a way, affected me because
Mhm.
now I'm like, well,
What am
she
I?
did. Yeah, exactly. That you said it. You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Yeah. I began to think like, well, was I a replacement for this son that she had to
Mm-hmm.
give up? And again, I put a caveat on all of this that Yuki, I firmly believe she loved me. I have no question about that. I often do question like how that love fit into me. Did she love me, or was I just that replacement for that son that she had to give up so many years ago?
Which
So
is often the case in
yeah, and the more reading I've done, the more research I've done, I found out that that is something that is very common. And
mm-hmm.
so, um, yeah, that's why I said, and my wife can tell you that up until, Yuki passed away, and even after she passed away, I was really like, she was the world to me. I thought the world of her, all these things. And then when I found out all of this information, it changed. My
Yeah.
my picture of her changed. So when I've told my son this, I've told a lot of friends that know Yuki, that now when I look back of pictures of me and her, when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, even, before she passed away, there's a few pictures of me and her. I view it differently now.
Mm.
It's really so again, I go back to that word. It's complicated to describe that relationship. But so again, I never searched for my birth mom. I never searched. I asked questions. I did ask
But did
questions.
you, when you were growing up, because of your difficult relationship with Yuki, did it, did you wonder about your
Mhm.
birth mother or have
Oh,
longing,
oh
like
yeah,
a certain longing
yes,
that
yeah,
many adoptees talk about? Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah. Matter of fact, I've told this on a couple other, one of the other podcasts I've done is that I used to be in grocery stores or the mall, and I would, 7, 8 years old, and I would look at other moms, and I would see features in them that looked like me. and I would say, oh, I wonder if that's my mom.
Oh,
Or then I'd
yeah.
see another one. I wonder if that's my mom. Maybe that one could be, and that creates this narrative inside of you that is very, very difficult to try and wrap your head around, because now
Yeah.
you're with this person who's taking care of you, who's providing food and clothes and all these things. And um, but at the same time, you're like, but I'm really not hers, in the sense that, I didn't, and the bonding that we've all, researched has shown, and all those things, that never happened.
Well, I think
But
that's
so,
common, right? Like
Yeah.
yes,
it's
Yeah.
hard. My understanding is adoptees don't bond; they
mm,
attach, but
yes,
don't
Attach.
bond.
that's
Yeah.
that's a great way to put it. That is a fantastic way to put it. Is that,
Yeah.
yeah, I was attached to you, and like a lot of people ask me about Ralph, my adopted dad, who died when I was 4. Do I remember anything about him? And I always say the only thing that I remember, sadly, was the night of his funeral.
Mm.
That is just burned into my mind. To even to this day, I remember just little aspects of it. And the one that I remember is that one of our friends, tried to take me out of the funeral home and go get me ice cream. I was 4 years old, ice cream, all this stuff. I got into the car and I just started screaming my head off, because in my mind, I was
They're
like,
taking you.
yep, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know what was going on, but I knew it wasn't good. So that's like that memory is, like, just, I remember that. Even now I'm 53, I can remember that. But yeah, growing up, I never really, yeah, like I said, and out of respect, because I've said this many times, that if I had even mentioned to Yuki that, I really like to start searching, I'd really like to find my birth mom, she would, number one, she would have never understood it. Two, she would have been mad. And three, it would have devastated her.
Yeah.
So out of respect for her,
Yeah.
I did not do anything, and I didn't search. I didn't do any until after she passed. And then after she passed, I started trying to say, well, let me start doing some research. And this was 2004, 2005. So, you know, the internet was still fairly new. There
Early.
wasn't a whole
Yeah.
lot of searching, databases, all those kinds of things. Um, so I said, well, let me try and see if I can get, because I kept hearing this thing about original birth certificate, original birth certificate. So I said, well, let me reach out to the state of North Carolina and to see if I can get my original birth certificate. Boy, was that interesting, because when I called the state capitol in Raleigh, and I asked, they were like, well, we can send you the birth certificate that we have on file and here and this and this and this. And I said, well, that's my adopted, that's from one of my adopted parents. I'm looking, I was adopted, looking for my original birth certificate. Oh, you can't have that.
Yeah.
I said, oh, what? Come again? Said, oh, no, no, no. There's a state law in North Carolina that you're not allowed to see that. And
So
you have
you're a
to get,
second class citizen. You don't get
yeah,
to have
Mhm.
yours.
yeah. That was the first like gut punch of what?
So
And
you hadn't known any of this before, like
no, I didn't
you
know
had
anything.
not read any books about adoption
No,
or anything. You're
no.
just, yeah.
I was flying. I was
And had
flying.
never met anybody did you have friends that were
No,
adopted?
no. I was completely alone in this, and
You're
my
like,
wife,
wow.
like I said, my wife was totally supportive about it. She's like, yeah, do go for it. And so when I got off the phone with the state of North Carolina, well, before I said that, they were like, well, the only thing we can offer you is non-identifying information. Like, well, what is that? And so they explained it to me, and I was like, okay, you can send it to me. And so like a couple of weeks later, now mind you, at this point, and I forgot to say, I enlisted in the Navy in 1993 at 23 years old. And I look back on it now, and it's the best decision I ever made. Not only because I had a great job and I traveled the world and, served country and all that stuff, but I firmly believe to this day that the Navy saved my life, because I have no idea what would have happened, is what kind of, whatever. And so the Navy was like my second family, because I had amazing friends and I met all these great people and all these things. So I credit the
Prior
Navy.
prior to that, were you having a hard time or
Yeah,
What,
it
going
was
through
difficult.
stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, college was rough, and it was, yeah, it was tough, especially after high school, and even in high school, it was really a challenge because Yuki really didn't understand, and as I said earlier, had a hard time communicating. I didn't have any brothers or sisters that I could talk to, those
Yeah.
kind of things. So
And
it was
she
kind of
really
like,
hadn't been in the States that long before you were born. She'd only
no,
been in the
10
States for
years. Yeah, yeah, 6 years by the time I was
6 years
born.
when
Yes,
you were
correct.
born. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. And she spoke English, and it was broken English, but she spoke English, and she did the best she could. And I always say that Yuki was very much a survivor. Like, she
Mhm.
found ways, whether it was right or wrong, she found ways to survive. So in that for that, yeah, I have to say that is that she was very much a survivor. Um,
And your stepfather was a kind man?
Oh, yeah, my stepfather, he was really good. Now, again, I always say he was a great provider. Like, he worked, like, he was working 7 days a week, you know, almost year round. He was working, and he was a tremendous provider. He was, at times, especially as I was a teenager, he was difficult to talk to. But as I've gotten older, what I have realized, there was a lot I contributed to that as well, because I wanted Ralph. I wanted my adopted dad. And so I created those walls. I built those walls
You
between
were a
me and him.
kid. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With a lot of
I mean,
pain.
let's
Yep.
not say any of this was your fault or on you. You were a
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
And
were
I was
the adults.
right. And so I was, trying to navigate through all of that. But yeah, after Yuki passed away, so I got the non-identifying information, and I just didn't really didn't know what to do with it. I
Was
reached
it
out
all
to a
redacted and
oh
things
yeah,
like that?
it's
Yeah.
totally
I've
redacted.
never
What
seen
did
it.
you glean from? I have some. What did you glean from
That
it?
my birth mom was 18. Maybe may I don't remember. The letters tucked away in a file cabinet somewhere in this house, but I pull it out, every so often to just look at it. But from what I remember, it's like she was 17, 18, somewhere in there. It listed how many she had a sister, listed what her parents did, how they were this tall, those kind, just very, very generic information. They did have generic information about my biological father in there. Um, that actually he was ill. He was also in the military. He had served time in the military, and had brothers and sisters and things like that. So it would, and didn't have a whole lot of really, really specific information. Um, Now, I thought about taking it to a private investigator and, hey, what can you find? And then, as I said, this was just at the beginning of like DNA searches, or like,
Mm-hmm.
search angels and those kind of things. And I found like a national adoptee database. I don't even remember what the website was called, but it basically was like you put in some generic information of like your date of birth and where you were born. I think like the county that you were born in, something like that. And so I did, just like, well, probably nothing's going to come of it. I think maybe a week later,
Huh?
I got a name, and it says, this is your birth mother's name. And I'm like, how did they
Really?
find this out? Well, through figuring this out, I mean, again, as I said, Asheville, North Carolina, back in 1970 was a very small town.
Wasn't that
Um,
many things like this happening?
and again, yes, exactly. And it turns out that I was the only boy that was born on that day
Oh,
in Asheville that that was listed as baby boy. There was no, like, no mother, no father listed. Well, the mother was listed, but the father's name was not. So my mother's name was on my birth mother's name, Judy, was on that document, was on my original birth certificate. Now, how they found it, I have no idea. But long story short, that was when I first got her name. And then, I started doing like like white pages search or whatever you want to say. And I found like like a town that she was born in. And it was in like southeastern North Carolina. And so, that area I'm familiar with that area. So I was like, well, maybe I can find somebody that might know. And then, as I've always said to people, it's like being in the military, you're moving every 3 to 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, I went from Hawaii, which is where I was living when Yuki died, and I started this whole journey. Then we moved to Virginia. Then that was there for a year, and then that, or 8 months. And then we went to Washington State. And then we went 2 years in Italy. And then finally back to the United States. We were in Virginia. And at that point, this was 2013, 2014. So I was in my mid 40s. And I was like, you know what? I've kind of danced around this and messed with this enough. I need to get serious about it. And so Facebook was Facebook was
Uh-huh.
starting. Facebook was a big thing at that time. And I started reading these articles of people, adoptees that were finding their birth families through Facebook. And I was like, it sounds kind of crazy, but I'll give it a try. And I found this, I can't remember the name of the Facebook group, but it was like adult adoptees from North Carolina.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And I joined it, and same kind of thing. I put in my basic information, basically the same information I put in back in '05. An hour,
Oh
I
my
got I
goodness.
I got my birth mom's name, and it was the same name. So I'm like, well, this has to be it. And then like 30 minutes later, they send me a wedding announcement from 1971, I believe it was, or 1972. I think it was 1971, of my birth mom getting married. And so I
Right
looked at a
after you were
picture.
born, right?
Yeah, right after I was born.
Huh.
And so, but I always say, and just to backtrack a little bit, but like the thing that really tipped the scales for me, the catalyst for me doing this, was when my son was born. My son was born in 2008. And
Mm-hmm.
when I held him for the first time, I had tears in my eyes, and my wife was like, "Oh, are you so happy?" I said, "Yeah, I am." But I said, "Do you realize that this is the first time that I am looking face to face at
Yeah.
someone that I share blood with?"
Yeah.
And that hit her just as much as it did me, because it was like, I never thought about that. She said, I never thought about it. I said, yeah, it's the first time I'm looking at someone that I share blood with. And so I was like, I have to do this. And like I said, military moves, and, just time goes by.
Yeah.
Well, so my son, it was 2015 when I did this. And so, I get my birth mom's name, and then like about an hour after
Did you
this,
see her profile on Facebook or anything?
no, I like that's I was just getting to that.
Okay.
I found they sent me my maternal aunt's Facebook page. They found her
So this
sister,
is like
her
a
younger sister.
Facebook search group type thing.
Exact, yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
I
it
don't know that
was,
I knew that existed. Did you,
yeah,
Sandra?
No, not,
it's
I mean, certainly not 10 years ago. No,
yeah,
or
it was
2015 or
fascinating.
whenever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 2015. Yeah, so it's fascinating how all this came together. So yeah, they sent me
Huh.
her Facebook page, and
Be careful when you join Facebook, folks,
That's
right?
that's what I tell people all the time. Be careful what you put out there, because her Facebook page was pretty open, and I was able to find, she had an email address on
This
her
is
Facebook
your
page. My
aunt.
my maternal aunt. Yeah.
She had her email address on Facebook.
Yeah, she
Oh,
had
You know,
her
you
no.
email.
but back then, like your email was
Was it? I don't.
prominently
Mhm.
displayed. You had to
Oh, it was.
purposefully take it
Yeah.
away. Yeah.
Yeah, you had to make
I
sure you
don't
didn't have
remember
it on
that.
there. Yeah. And so I was like, well, let's give this a shot. So that night, I put together like a 2 or 3 little short paragraph email, and I must have read that thing probably 50, 60 times
Can I
over
guess
and
that the
over.
words, I don't want anything, I'm not here to hurt
Yeah, yeah,
anybody.
exactly. Yeah. That's how I started. I said, I just want you to know I'm not like some kind of weirdo. I'm not this and this and that.
I don't want money.
Yeah, exactly. And, I just said, I have reason to believe that you are related to, you are, Judy, and I have reason to believe that she is my birth mother. I'm adopted. I went, just very brief stuff. And so I looked at my wife. I said, you understand that once I send this, we're on this ride and we have no idea where it's going to go. She goes, okay, I'm right
I
behind you.
like your wife. Shout out to
Yeah,
your wife.
she's awesome. Yeah, she's awesome. She's my hero. So
Oh,
I sent it, and I was like, I'm sweating and my heart's just jumping out of my chest. And then it's probably about 15 minutes later, I get a response back from her, from my maternal aunt, and her name is Sharon. And she's like, well, it's possible. I'm young. I'm Judy's younger sister. So I was young at that time, but I do remember, she said that I do remember Judy going away
yeah.
for a while. And she says, but give me a couple of days and I'm going to reach out to some family friends and I'll see what I can find out. I said, okay. And then she added this little sentence at the
Family
bottom.
friends. Why didn't she just want to go to Judy?
Maybe Judy didn't want to.
Well, now this was part of the
It's her
email.
sister. Okay.
Well, this was part of the email, and I have to add this, is that she said that my birth mom Judy had a stroke. It was a massive
Oh,
stroke, like maybe 2010, somewhere around that
mm.
time frame. I could be off on that, but it was a very bad stroke, and so she's bedridden.
Oh,
She's in a
that's
nursing,
sad.
yeah, she's in a
Oh
nursing home.
gosh.
So that's why, it's hard to use that, to say, oh, I'll just reach out to Judy.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, 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 no,
Knowing
no.
that.
It's I should have put that part in there. So that's on me. But so yeah, she said, let me reach out to some family friends and I'll get back to you. So it was like, but then she's put this sentence at the end. She says, I just wanted to tell you, I looked at your Facebook profile and you are she says, you are an exact resemblance to Judy's daughter, Tracy. And I said, oh my gosh, I have
Oh,
a sister, which we always wonder as adoptees, do I
yeah.
have another, sibling out there? So, but again, it was like, okay, just, kind of wait and wait. And just, so it was like a week later, she called me, Sharon called me, and she's like, so this is what I found out. She said that, Judy got pregnant with you. And my parents were very strict Southern Baptists, and the father was out of the picture, and they were not going to have a child out of wedlock, all this other stuff. So they sent her to a home for unwed mothers, which was in Asheville, by the way. And that's where she had me, was at a home for unwed mothers. And so, I know you guys
Yeah.
have read The Girls Who Went Away. I read that book with a lot of
But we
tears in
haven't
my
done
eyes.
that one yet.
It's an
Yeah,
amazing
it's
book.
on our
It's
on
just
our
it's a
list. We did American Babe. We've been doing
okay.
American Baby.
Yeah, and it was a tough one for me to read. That
I'm
was a very,
sure.
very tough book for me to read, but the stories were just heart-wrenching. And so every time I read another story, I was thinking about my mom. I was thinking
Isn't
about my
it
mom.
sad? Like, let's send off. It just still upsets me. Go on.
Also,
Yeah.
I just want to point out that the word wedlock is just
Mm,
so like
yeah.
then you want to have a
Yeah.
child out of wedlock. Anyway,
Right. Yeah. And again, 1970s Bible Belt, North
Oh, I'm
Carolina,
sure.
this was you didn't do this. So that kind of gave me more background information about, my story, if you will. And so
Did you search Facebook for your sister? I
I
would have.
initially I did not, because I didn't know her last name. I
Oh,
didn't know what her last name was. But then um like around that same time that Sharon called me, she also called Tracy and talked to Tracy about it. Now Tracy didn't know anything about me, knew nothing about what our mom had gone through. And so, but one night I'm sitting at home and I get this Facebook message from Tracy, and she introduces herself, and she's just like, I am in total shock. I didn't know anything about it,
Oh.
this and this and that. And we chatted on Facebook through Facebook Messenger for quite a while, just kind of sharing, each other's
Was she
stories.
an
And that's
only
kind of,
child as well?
no, there was another, she had a younger brother. So it's another
Mhm.
younger brother that I have, excuse me. And so, um, but the first time that Tracy and I actually talked on the phone, we talked for about 3.5 hours. Just, it was like we had always been together. Like we had never, like 45 years or whatever it was, 40 some years never existed. We
I
kind
love
of
this for
just,
you because it was so lonely for you. I think
yeah.
about your
And
childhood being so lonely.
yeah, and Tracy and I've talked about that as well. And, she even said, she goes, it explains a lot about, she goes, now I understand now I understand mom a lot more because knowing this. And, you know, my mom didn't tell anybody about this. She kept this secret for 45 years
So
and
sad.
didn't tell anybody. And so, y- yeah, and so I was like, well, and I didn't want to push, trying to meet my mom. I wanted to, but I didn't push it, and mainly because both Tracy and I talked about it, but we both agreed, we didn't know how my mom would react to all of this,
And
and
she's in
given her,
in care, right?
Right
yeah,
now, yeah.
exactly,
Is she verbal and
Yeah.
a little, yeah, and so that was like, we were just concerned about that, just how it would react. So she talked to her father, and again, it's a long kind of drawn out story, but my Judy and her current husband, his name is Danny, and Danny is one of a kind. I mean, like I said, my mom's in a nursing home, and Danny is there all day, every day. And when I say every day, 7 days a week, he's there from 8 o'clock in the morning when they visiting hours open until about 6:30 or 7 o'clock when they give my mom medication to help her sleep. He's there, and he's right
Wow.
by her bedside all day. He doesn't go anywhere. So he is one of a kind.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's special. And so
She's
she told,
loved, you know?
yes, very much so. And all the staff at the nursing home love her and everything else. But, so Tracy told Danny first, and she's like, let me talk to him and just try to see, what would be best. And, so then um, right after Mother's Day, 2016. So, about a year had gone by because I started this whole thing in February of 2015. So a year had gone by, and I just remember praying about it and just really how's this going to work. And so shortly after Mother's Day 2016, Tracy texted me, and she's like, it's time, let's get a weekend together to where you can meet her. And I was like, okay, and so we figured out a weekend. Took my wife and son, and we drove down to North Carolina. And the next day, we were going to go, and it was going to be me, Tracy, her husband, and one of her granddaughters, Tracy's granddaughters, to go and to the nursing home. I didn't want to bring my son and my wife because
What
I didn't
if?
know how this was going to go.
Yeah.
I just didn't know. And so, we went to the nursing home. I was out in the waiting room, and again, my heart's just going, boom, 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 boom. And so, trying to calm myself and, breathing and praying and all this stuff. And so, what I found out later was that Tracy, she went to my mom, and, she said, Mom, do you remember, 1970, you remember you giving up for a child giving up a child? And initially my mom said no. Initially, she was like, no, I don't. And then finally Tracy was like, Mom, it's okay. I
Oh.
know, and it's okay. And his name is Patrick, and he's been looking for you for
Oh.
a long time, and he's here, and he wants to meet you. And so finally, Tracy said, finally, she just let out this big breath, and she just went, yes.
Oh,
And
it makes
so
me cry to think about, like, I don't know how repressed that is for
the
so
relief,
long,
yeah,
not
yeah,
telling anybody.
right, not telling anybody. And so I come into the room and it's like I meet her face to face and I'm crying and she's getting emotional and we were, like I said, we were all nervous because we didn't know how this was going to go and how she would get emotional about it. And then all of a sudden, I'm talking to her and she's looking at me and all of a sudden she just looks at me and she goes, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." And I said, "You don't need to apologize about anything." I said, "God brought us together and it's okay. It's okay." And, she told me, she said, "I didn't know whether I had a boy or a girl. They never let."
They
Yep.
just took you.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. That's what, and I've read that that's pretty common. That was
Yeah.
common back in those days that,
I mean, that
you
happened
know,
to me. Yeah.
yeah. And, it was like, it's just so heartbreaking to hear that, they didn't tell her, "Oh, you had a boy," or "Oh, you had a girl." She
Yeah.
said, "I didn't know." She said, as soon as you were born, they took you away. And then a couple days later, her parents came and picked her up. And,
No one talked to
it's
her about her feelings.
nope. And they told her that, of course, the staff, they told her at the home for unwed mothers, "Oh, it'll be okay. You'll get over this. You'll
Oh,
be fine."
God.
Yeah, that
That
was
standard
prevalent
line.
in that
It's like,
area. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so then, I was having and then right at the end of that visit, I was there for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And right at the end of that visit, I was getting ready to leave and I kissed her on the forehead and I said goodbye. And I said, "I'll see you again." And she stopped me and she said, "Patrick." And I turned around and I said, "Yeah." She says, and all she said to me was grandson. And I said, "Oh, you want to meet your grandson?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, well, we'll arrange a visit for you to meet him." So about a month and a half later, we did another trip down there and she got to meet him and he got to
Oh,
meet, she got to meet my wife and got to meet her grandson. And she actually keeps a picture of him on this bulletin board that's next to her bed. There's a picture of him and she always wants it updated. She's like,
oh,
anytime I tell her, "Oh, Dylan took a new school photo," she said, "I want it."
I'm glad
She,
to hear she's still alive.
yeah.
well, I talk to her every day.
Oh, that's
I
Oh,
amazing.
Yeah, I talk to her every day. And she tells me she loves me. I tell her I love her.
I
We
love
usually talk
this,
for about
Patrick.
we
Um,
usually talk for about 10 to 15 minutes, give or take, and most of it and her husband Danny's there too. So it's on speakerphone and she'll ask questions. Sometimes it's hard to hear, but Danny's there to provide, "Oh, this is what she's trying to ask," or whatever. So it's, I've tried to see her. I don't see her as much as I'd want to.
Yeah.
We're trying to plan a visit here in the next couple months to go down there. But the best part was, 2016, August 10th, my birthday. I didn't really expect anything. I wasn't expecting anything from her. It's like, I don't even know, you know, mid-afternoon, my phone rings and it's my mom.
Uh-huh.
And I said hello, and she just goes, "Happy birthday." And I just started crying because I was like, I've been waiting 46 years to hear you say that. And it's
Yeah.
like that was so, like, that put like the whole, that was like the
Healing.
icing, it was just like the whole, that just completed everything. And so, yeah, I mean, my sister Tracy and I have a very strong relationship. We don't, she's busy. She's got her things going. I've got my things going. We don't talk as much as we would like to nowadays, but we still keep in touch. And, we're very close to each other. Like I said, I talk to my mom every day, if not every other day.
Yes.
So, it's
I'm
really
so
is,
happy you found her. Like, what if you waited and with her
yeah,
health, it's
yeah.
just,
And,
that's
but,
important.
the big question, what
well,
about your birth father?
Oh,
Did you get,
yes.
I
I
mean,
have I haven't really done a whole lot of searching about him.
do you
I
have a
did get
name? Do you know? I mean,
I do have some
and well,
information.
she's not able to really tell you, I guess.
No, no, and I don't know how, that would go. I really don't. So, and again, like for me, I'm completely satisfied the way things are right now.
Although
You
maybe,
know,
yeah, I mean, just in terms of completely practical
mm,
health
yeah,
questions for yourself,
yes,
for your son,
yep. And like
knowing
I
your
did,
health history.
yep.
Mhm.
And I did get a lot of information, health information from my sister Tracy about that side of the family and, the things that, we wonder, I've always wondered about, is there this, is there that, that runs in the family. Actually, the one thing, arthritis, which I had dealt with for a long time, that runs on my mom had major arthritis and still, and so now I'm dealing with it. So though that was something that I found out. So, but it was like I always think, what if I had, done this, or, could I have done it earlier? And, could I have tried to find her earlier? And, you know, I was talking to her husband Danny one day. We were having lunch on one of the visits down there, and we were talking about the whole thing. And I just told him, I said, I said, I really wish that I had done this sooner, because I had her name. And I told him, I said, I had her name and I knew where she was from. And he told me, he was like, that was such a small town. He said, all you would needed to have done was to have called the fire department, the local fire department, and given them her name, and they would have found her for you. And I'm
Well,
just like,
maybe
you
things
know,
things happen
yep.
in
At
a
your
way
own
that,
time.
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah. And I do believe that this was all part of, very, as I said earlier, deep in, faith is a very big thing for me. And I believe that it
Yeah.
was God's timing.
mm,
Really believe it was God's timing, that it brought everything together at the right time. And, but he also told me another thing. He said, said, I didn't have told you this. He says, but, Judy used to be laying there in the afternoons or during the day, and she just had this far off look, this really far off look. And he'd look at her and he says, I'd look at her and I said, Judy, what are you thinking about? And she's just looked at him. She'd look over at him. She'd go, nothing.
Yeah.
And he goes, I am convinced now that I know about you. He says, I am convinced that she was thinking about you, not necessarily me specifically, but thinking about that child that she gave up. And it just reinforces the fact that, these birth moms, they never, even though they say, oh, don't forget, you'll
They
forget
don't
about it, or you'll
forget.
move it. You don't forget. You can't forget. And so, yeah, I'm just, really, it's just like now I try and help as many adoptees as I can, to just tell them, don't give up. That's my message to them, is that
I like that.
don't give up, because you just, even if you get a, closed door or something like that, or they don't want to talk about it or something like that, you just never know when something's going to happen, or try to reach out to another relative that you have and things like that. But I now what I've done is, North Carolina has motivated me so much that I am very, very active with reaching out to politicians and lawmakers,
Good.
to try to get these laws changed. And as a matter of fact, when I was living in Rhode Island, I was up in the, my last duty station in the Navy was Rhode Island. And I found out that Connecticut, which was a state right next to
Mhm.
Rhode Island, was trying to get a bill passed for full access for adult adoptees. And I reached out and I said, hey, this is my story. Here it is. And they reached back to me, the people that were organized, that were behind the bill and trying to push it, lobbying for it. They were like, can we use your story, to be presented along with a bunch of others at the state legislature for when we're going to have this bill heard? And I was like, absolutely. And so, yeah, my story
Good for
was
you.
was read at the state legislature, and that bill got passed.
that's
Good.
And
fantastic.
that, yeah, so I just
I like
encourage
that
that.
you're helping others with this and that you're
Yeah,
open.
and that's what I try to tell other adoptees, is like, even if you are running into, brick walls or stuff like that, get involved in other ways to try and help other adoptees that are going through the same thing, or something similar, because
Yeah.
we're all in this, all in this boat together, of this unique life that we have led or have had.
Yeah.
And, some of it's very tough and very painful. And, I know for me, like, I went through several rounds of therapy and years of it. to try and work through all my different issues. And I remember talking to one therapist that I had from the VA. And this was only about 2-3 years ago. I was talking to them about this. So it
I can
shows you that
picture.
this is, yeah. So this is it's throughout your life. You're working through these things. And he heard my story and he's like, he says, if I had to tailor a person that would be the, like tailor a suit for a person that had all of these complex issues, you would be it, because you were born into a family, you were adopted into a family with a Japanese mother, American father, your father passes away at 4, you're growing up. And I mean, he just went through this, the
And
long
you're
thing.
being raised with a woman who had massive trauma.
Right.
Of
And
her
so
own.
he's like, you just are the perfect person for therapy. I
Great.
said,
I
oh,
hope he then went and educated himself on how to therapy adoptees.
I
'Cause
hope so.
don't
Yeah.
many therapists haven't gone to school they don't focus on that. So
No, they don't. And he admitted himself, he's like, you're one of the first people. He says, actually, you're the first person that I've dealt with that's been adopted and gone through
sheesh.
all of this. And, so it just reinforces that we don't talk enough about it. We don't share our stories
Yeah.
enough. So I
Well, I
think
think
that's
certainly it's changed a lot in the past several years with social
yes.
media.
Yes.
Lots of voices are being heard now, which is great.
And I'm very, very grateful for podcasts like yours that get these stories
Thank
out
you.
there, and you guys are awesome. And
Thank you.
I
And
listen
thank
every
you
week.
I'm so glad. And thank you for sharing your story. And I hope you will dive a bit
me
deeper
too.
Finding your father. I think
Yeah.
that will.
Yeah.
Will you update us if you do?
I will definitely do that. And like I said, I just, if I could say anything to any of the other listeners out there, it's just, just don't give up. If you're in that situation, if you're in that, that place where you're trying to figure out if this is worth it, some of it may not, even for me, some of it wasn't pretty, finding these things out, learning about these things, especially the things that Yuki had kept hidden from me for all those years, was very, very painful. And after she's gone, like, I couldn't go to her and get mad at her.
Yeah, you have to process it on your own.
Exactly. And that was what therapy helped me do.
I like that you're also talking about therapy, because you're in the military, you're a man. There's a lot of barriers with therapy still with men.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. And I
with
still,
people in general.
yeah. And like, I retired in 2019, and that in and of itself was an emotional process, because it was very much like going through a divorce, which I had gone through as well. I was married at 23, way too young, didn't know anything about it, young wife, and, the marriage didn't work. And so that was another situation that I, had to work my way through. And so, yeah, it's just, but I guess I keep going back to, like, my current wife, Paula. She is
Shout out
just
to Paula.
Yeah, she is amazing. And there's no way I could do what I do and have gone through all these things without her support. So, yeah.
Well, I'm really glad you have her and you have your son, and now you've found your mother, and I mean, that's great. This is all really, really positive stuff for what started out to be a very, very lonely beginning.
Yes.
Thank you for being vulnerable and honest about it.
Yeah, I thank you very much. And my son is amazing. He's 15 now, and he's playing music like I used to do. I mean, he plays the saxophone. I still play the saxophone. And watching your kid do something that you used to do, it's like, man, this is really cool. And last night he had a football game. He's in the marching band, and I'm watching him from the stands. I'm watching him up in the stands, and I'm like, I guess the old adage is true. The apple does not fall far from the tree. And he's awesome. He's an amazing kid. Yeah.
People who don't know their genetics, who know their genetics, and we don't know our genetics, it's hard for others to relate like adoptees can in that way.
Yeah.
Just It is amazing. This has been wonderful.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. And like I said, thanks so much for the time and the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Talk
to you soon, Patrick.
Yeah, take care. Both of you take care.
Stay in touch.
Okay. Yes, I will. Definitely.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.